Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get started, I need to give a warning for pedophilia and grooming for the first story in this video. I'll also have it labeled in the timestamps in case you want to skip it. And if you want to send your own story, you can send it at southerncannibal.com. I look forward to telling your story. Now if you're all ready, let's get started. And remember to always stay hungry. The story began when I first entered high school as a freshman. As a 15-year-old girl entering to the next stage of their life, I was excited, but I was also scared shitless because I knew I wouldn't be able to handle the pressures and toxicity that came with going to high school. Mostly because I was naive, insecure, and just constantly filled with anxiety, which controlled half of my decision making. I can confirm that I definitely let my anxiety get the better of me back then, and because of that fact, it was hard to make friends to fit in. Naturally, being introverted and reserved, I was antisocial, which made creating connections a challenge. I didn't talk to anyone unless they talked to me first, and if they did, I immediately turned into a people pleaser because I felt very lonely during my teen years, which is due to past unresolved trauma. So any attention I received, I embraced wholeheartedly with open arms and seemingly without any doubts. My high school was a 15-minute walk from my house, so I usually walked every day to school and back. I live in a small, quiet city in California, and for the most part has always felt like a safe place. There's crime, but not enough to fear for your life every day. So I always felt comfortable walking. In fact, it was therapeutic. 3 or 4 blocks down from where I lived was this house that always had this wide contour car parked on the side of it. I would have to walk past this house to get to school every day. Then shortly after, I started to notice a man in the car every morning, letting the engine idle as if letting the car warm up. He would never say anything though, but I could feel his eyes on me as I'd walk past. But I was so insecure that I walked with my head down all the time, missing the world in front of me. But I wish that I had enough sense because I really missed all the red flags. On one chilly gray morning, when I was coming up on this house, the man that was usually in his car was now cleaning the frost off his car windows. And when I quietly walked past, I heard him say, "Hey, good morning." I looked up for the first time, and I saw that this man was fairly young and not as old as I thought. But I knew he was still a full-grown adult and I was still a kid. But I was always taught to respect my elders, so I said hi back and put my head back down and kept walking. It was the first time a guy outside of school would talk to me. I felt that he was being nice. So after that day, he continued to say good morning and even threw in a few "how are yous." I honestly didn't think anything of it. Well, until things started to escalate. Instead of just saying good morning, little by little he had started asking questions about me, like where I lived, who did I live with, how old was I, etc. I was timid, but naively told him everything he wanted to know because I was starting to like the attention. I wasn't the most attractive in high school, and it wasn't like there were boys tripping their way to my feet. So when he started asking me questions, I felt noticed. I felt like someone was actually interested in getting to know me. It was almost hard to believe. He was honest, and he told me he was 22, and it immediately made me scared because I just knew that I shouldn't be talking to someone this much older than me. I knew something was wrong or off about the situation, but the loneliness and desperate need for company overpowered my vigilance. Our conversations grew longer and longer every time we met, and I was oddly starting to trust this older man known as Gil. It got to the point where I was hoping I'd see him every time I left for school or came home from school, and he always was waiting for me, smiling. It made me feel giddy to be seen. He had never physically touched me up until this point. That is, until one day he asked if he could get a hug. I was apprehensive, not because of our age gap, but because I was realizing that I was starting to like him. So I gave him a hug, and he wrapped his arms around me tightly. So tightly my breasts were squished against his chest. He breathed in, almost as if he was smelling me. My heart was thrashing so hard in my chest that I wanted to throw up, but I held him back. His hand stayed on my back, but the way he was hugging me felt so morally wrong. It felt as if he got some sense of gratification just from the simple gesture of a hug. I slowly drew away, and he smiled, thanking me as if I had saved his life. I nervously smiled and then said that I have to go, and I then took off as fast as I could back to my house. I suddenly felt sick, confused, but that hug was the realest affection that I had felt in a long while. I wanted to feel that tenderness again, all the time. There were areas of my life that lacked that security. Before I knew it, a month had gone by and things had escalated even further. I was starting to see him everywhere now, parked on the side of the streets of different routes that I took to and from school, running into him at stores and community events. He always knew where to find me, and though it was kind of creepy, again, the affection I was getting really outweighed what I thought was unethical. He was like my drug, the one thing that delayed me losing myself. I really struggled with mental health from trauma as a child, and I felt suicidal most days. But during that time, he was the only highlight of my day, as crazy as it sounds. He began asking me to meet him after school almost every day, and without my grandma's knowledge, I would meet up with this stranger. Then we would drive somewhere quiet and talk, until he started becoming more bold and began kissing me and fondling me. For the record, we never had sex. He tried, but I was a virgin and I wasn't ready, nor did I feel right about doing it with him, even if I did like him. My consciousness was screaming something about all of this wasn't right. Something about him was sinful. There was a darkness lurking inside him that was way beyond my comprehension at the time, but my body was under his control. I was so innocent and kind-hearted that I wanted to believe that there was something about him that could be good, but as time went on, he only proved to me that he could be worse. We had gotten into an argument one particular day after school, and I decided that I didn't want to see him that day because my grandma was growing suspicious of my whereabouts, since I normally told her I'd have to stay for tutoring after school. I didn't want to get in trouble over someone that wasn't even my boyfriend, or someone who had no business being around me in the first place. So when I told him I couldn't hang, his nice gentleman demeanor had vanished and anger took over. He begged and begged me to stay, telling me that he'll even go and talk to my grandma if he has to. I kind of just paused and was like, "Talk to my grandma about what?" "Well, I'm gonna tell her you're seeing me. We've been seeing each other for a bit now. Maybe it's time for me to introduce myself." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, good luck with that. You don't even know where I live." He nodded, then smirking, "But I do." "Can you stop playing around? I really have to go," I replied, annoyed. He slid his hands in his pockets. "You live in those beige apartment complexes, right? I always see your grandma on the porch smoking a cigarette." I gulped, feeling knots turning in my stomach. "How do you know that?" He slowly grazed his hand along the side of my face. "I've been watching you for some time now. I started seeing you walk to school, and I thought you were so beautiful. I had to get to know you." I started trembling, horror-stricken. "You've been stalking me?" My lips quivered, and vomit was creeping up my throat. I feel so stupid." I backed up. "Don't ever come near me again. Leave me the hell alone." I practically ran all the way home. I shut my door and locked it, falling weakly on my bed and letting the wave of realization conquer over me as I cried. He knows where I fucking live. He knows what my fucking grandma looks like. This was all part of his evil, diabolical plan to molest a young girl who was only looking for comfort in a friend. He manipulated every single move since day one, and I fell for it like the idiot I was. Nobody knew this horrific secret, and if my grandma knew, all hell would have broke loose. I contemplated 1,000 times on telling her, because whether I liked it or not, my life was at risk. He knew so many personal things about me, and I fed him the breadcrumbs. I felt so sick, so disgusted, so used. I cried for hours in my room, and I finally came up with a plan to avoid him as much as I could. It was really hard at first, but eventually he faded away from the picture because I threatened him with going to the police about it if he didn't stay away. Years after that, at the age of 22, I had stumbled across his profile on a dating site, and he instantly messaged me. Now older, more mature, and quick-witted, there were so many unanswered questions that I had wanted to ask him, so many unresolved feelings. So when he asked me to talk over dinner, I obliged, because I felt seeking out the truth for this traumatic incident would bring me closure. I really needed that closure. I felt like I was suffocating without it. We met at a local Mexican restaurant, and instead of feeling anger and resentment, those old feelings that I thought were gone had resurfaced. It's really sickening to think about, but all those times we had spent together, all those times I confided in him and was vulnerable was purposefully done to create a bond, to create trust, and it worked. Because years later, despite the circumstance, I was still stuck in that same place I was at 15 years old, except this time I was older and I could make my own decisions for myself. However, I still made the wrong decision. I gave in to my anxiety once again, and we actually began dating, as in boyfriend and girlfriend. Some people might judge the situation harshly, but someone that's gone through constant traumatic experiences can easily be reeled in with the right words and offers. It only lasted a month though, because he was becoming controlling and verbally abusive, and even went as far as using the biblical verses as justification for his actions. That was the final line for me. I was lost, but my relationship with God was not, and I knew it was a sign to get the hell out before I ended up hurt. After our breakup, he lost his job, as well as his apartment, and his car broke down. Karma ended up being his worst enemy. He was the same predatory man I met when I was 15. He was still a fucking sick pervert that still had some sense of manipulative dominance over me. And for the first time in a long time, I was opening my eyes to the entirety of the situation. How did I let it go on for so long? I have no idea. But I promised myself I'd never put myself in a situation like that ever again. And if I did, I'd tell someone. I truly believed God was watching over me. He didn't let anything happen to me, and I will always look back and be grateful for that, especially since not everyone else comes out unscathed. I trusted my well-being with someone whose only motive was to harm me. Please reach out if someone's preying on you. Tell someone or call the police. The longer you stay silent, the more pain it'll bring, and I never want this to happen to anyone else. My name is Clea, and I moved out to California over 10 years ago because I needed a change. I moved in with a girl that I met online through some mutual ex-friends. We'll call my former roommate Maria. At first, Maria and I got along really well, and the first month went well. We worked together during the first month of me living there, but my job was only temporary to help me get on my feet and because they needed some extra help. I worked in a warehouse while Maria worked in the office. I spent my days at work packing orders to be shipped out. The job was fun, and I was honestly bummed when that ended. That's when Maria started showing her true colors. First, it was just little things before it became more extreme, so I didn't realize it at first. Turns out Maria wasn't happy that I was making more money because I wasn't on a payroll, and I was getting paid under the table in cash, which ended up being bigger than her paycheck every week. The second month we had lived together, she was telling people really awful things behind my back, saying that I wasn't paying my half of the rent and utilities. She also told people that we were going to get evicted and other things that weren't true. Maria was very good at playing the victim and making people feel sorry for her. She was also good at painting others as the bad guy. I had started receiving texts from former mutual friends going off on me. For context, all of the utilities were in my name because she wouldn't put anything in her name for some reason, and we definitely weren't delinquent in payments. My bank screwed up when I had paid my rent check, but quickly caught their mistake and fixed it ASAP. She used this against me even after it had been resolved. At the end of month 2, she had started insulting me one night, making threats and claiming that every single thing in the apartment belonged to her, including even my own personal belongings that I had before I'd ever even moved there. This went on for 2 hours, and I didn't say anything because I was scared that she'd force me out and steal all my stuff. I didn't have any family out there, and 99.9% of my friends I had met through her. She told me that I either had to give her 2 months of rent in advance or move out, and that she'd give me a month to decide. I didn't trust her, so I decided to move out but didn't tell her. She told me that her family would pay half of my rent if I left until she found a new roommate. For a month, I was job hunting and apartment hunting. Just as I thought I was screwed, I ended up finding an apartment 2 days before. So after that, I went home to start packing up my belongings, and I did the same while she was at work the following day. The day came that I was moving. My ex-boyfriend offered to help me. I had showered and everything early the night before, and I locked myself in my room, waiting until she went to work to come out the next morning. I finished up packing up my stuff, and then took a bus to my ex's, and we drove back to my place. We had quickly packed up the car, but I was unable to bring a couple of pieces of furniture with me. I had left a note in her room and closed the bedroom door before leaving for the final time. I felt really relieved thinking that would be the end of it. Later that night, when I assumed she found my note, she then texted me saying, "You actually found someone to help you move?" before she called her family and friends to tell them a completely different story of what actually went down. I received screenshots from multiple people where she had posted on social media saying that her piece of shit roommate just up and left. This was when calls and texts started flooding in and saying some pretty vile things, as well as her own mother screaming at me on my voicemail. This was before you could block stuff, and the calls and texts continued for months until I decided to change my number, but then the harassment on social media started. Maria frequently posted indirect threats about bashing my face in and that I was on her turf. She lied about me for years to everyone she could, and she attempted to smear my name and my business at the time. About a month after I had left, her stepdad saw me walking home with groceries and attempted to run me over with his pickup truck near my new apartment. I had to lay low for about 7 months before someone on my friends list had invited me out to a club that wasn't far from my apartment for a popular night, so I went out and made new friends. The girl who had moved in after me had reached out to me 3 to 4 months later, and she told me about the horror of living with Maria for that time, and it was almost verbatim of what I dealt with. The same type of harassment, gaslighting, and abuse. We became friends for a long time, but she had started dating someone and got engaged. She told me they were removing themselves from social media because they wanted to focus on their lives out of state and not have an online presence. Since this, we've lost contact. A few years after we had become friends, our former roommate had gotten a hold of her nudes and posted both my friend and herself on a popular revenge porn site. It was to make it look like they had submitted each other's pics, but in reality that was not the case. We had also started getting death threats from one of Maria's mentally unstable friends who spent all of her time online harassing and threatening us despite being a new mother. For many years I dealt with the harassment, stalking, and threats from Maria and her friends. Maria has since gotten married, started a family, and moved away, and I haven't heard from her since, and she seems to have stopped talking about me, thank God. I really hope Maria has forgotten about me and anyone else she's done this to, and that she hasn't bothered anyone else since. She really is a damn psycho. Hopefully Maria got the help she needed to stop the crazy behavior that she was engaging in for years. My name is Nerdy, and I'm a female who was born in the Copper City in the New York State. I was 13 years old and had just turned that 2 months prior. My kid brother was born just over a month before my birthday. So he was only 2 to 3 months old, I believe, at the time of this scary story that I'm about to tell. I had a typical routine on how I usually walked to my Nana's house because my grandmother only lived about 3 blocks in a large parking lot away from my house. I was walking my baby brother to my grandmother's house in a stroller. My mother had left before me to go to the pharmacy for my grandmother, so my brother and I were alone at the time. As we got to the parking lot, I was aware of a blue crappy car that kept going by over and over again, which I thought was odd. But I still kept walking and just tried paying attention as I was trying to keep my brother safe. As we passed through the large parking lot, I was trying to be quick because the car pulled in and drove around for a bit, before sitting in a random spot where I saw the guy staring at me in the stroller, which caused me to start panicking. I picked up my pace yet again, almost in a jog at this point, and we got out of the lot and across the road into the 3rd block. My Nana was just around the corner at the end of the block, but he had pulled up beside me and kept trying to talk to me, but I ignored him. We almost got to the alleyway next to my old house. That's when my old neighbor happened to come out right at that exact moment, so I then looked at him and said, "Hey Dad, we're home," before turning to walk towards him, as he then walked down the steps as he then saw the car and the fear in my eyes. He then walked up to me, but right at that moment the car pulled off. I then sighed in relief. I had then asked him to call my Nana's house phone, because cell phones were not very big back then. My Nana walked to the corner, and I then walked down to her with my brother, and we made it out of this safe. I never saw that man or the car again. He was a guy about 5'10" and about 150 pounds. He drove a very dirty, crappy, rusty light blue car with a dented roof. So yeah, that's my creepy story about how I was stalked with my kid baby brother. Be safe out there, everyone. Please. Hey everyone. That's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always